Alright, it's been a while since I've done one of these, and I wanted to get back into these Proverbs Bible studies, mostly because I've been praying about it, and this is something I'm supposed to be doing, and I keep on not doing it, and so this is my attempt to get back into it and actually be intentional about creating some of this content. So this is a quick look at a Bible verse. It's not super complicated, and I wanted to take a look at it here in Blue Letter Bible because this is a free online study resource. When we take a look at this, I usually read in the ESV. I have a wonderful ESV study Bible, and so I usually read this way. And so I know this passage as is translated here. So let's take a look. I opened today, I wanted to look at Proverbs 17:1. I'm like, all right, let's take a look at some of the resources that we have available. Now, I like to actually read this text using the Hebrew and using the Greek. Because I'm trying to learn these languages, because a language is basically a code. It's a gateway into a cultural context. And if we really want to understand what's in the Bible, we have to know what the context is. And that's why coming back into the original language is super helpful. Another reason why it's super helpful is it looks like we have this in the King James Version, this particular inline Hebrew English translation. Now, when you get to Hebrew, you read from right to left, and so that's how it's laid out right here. But I know the word for this word sacrifices in almost all of the most popular translations these days, like the ESV, is translated as feasting. And so we have better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife. And this is how I've read it. Now, when I came to this word sacrifices, I thought this was very interesting because the time when people would feast in those days was when they brought a sacrifice. Like when we go through and read through the writings of Moses, all of these indications about sacrifices were times when people would come and they would offer an animal, but the animal wouldn't always be burned up. It was basically a ceremonial offering, and the people would then actually eat the animal that was offered as the sacrifice. This is particularly true when it comes to the Passover lamb, where we see how that functioned. In terms of the other offerings, it's a little bit more obscure, and some of the offerings are only for the priests, and some of them are only for God, and some of them are for the people. But in any case, sacrifices and feasting go together. So when we look at this word and we begin to contrast, because in the Proverbs often teach through contrast. And let's just go back to the full passage right up here. Better is a dry morsel with quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Most of us understand what this means, and I took a look at the Hebrew a little bit ago. It's fairly consistent across the way, like when Jesse tells David, his son, to take a morsel of food to his brothers. So we're just taking some food. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a big ceremonial thing. It's just food. And so this is what the passage is talking about. The writer of the Proverbs is bringing us into a contrast. Better is a dry morsel with quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. So if we take this apart grammatically, we're contrasting two things. We have with quiet and with strife. And then we have dry morsel, and then we have house full of feasting or sacrifices. Now, it's just fascinating to me how it's so easy to read the Bible and miss these little footnotes. Like here, where the footnote actually tells us, yes, the Hebrew word for this is sacrifices. But I've read this verse my whole life thinking of it as feasting without recognizing the whole context that the writer was bringing into play. The imagery that would be in people's minds would be like, wow, this house full of feasting is let's just say it's a very religious household. It's one where people are serving God very openly, celebrating openly, and along with that, there's strife. This is so interesting, especially when we look at this word quiet, because when we scroll down here, we come to this. By the way, the writer of the proverb here is attempting to make this contrast even more vivid, because dry deals with barrenness, desolation, wasteland. Like, that word basically means this is an old leftover. Something nobody would come over to your house to enjoy. You're going to have kind of an empty house, maybe even a quiet house, if you don't have one that is full of sacrifices. So let's look at this. When we look up the word, just the way you navigate in the Blue Letter Bible, you have to click on the Strong's reference, and this takes you to all of the information that they have about this. So the word quietness, here is how it's translated. It's translated as quietness by the King James one time. The rest of the time it means prosperity, peace, abundance, peace. Security, abundance, peace, prosperity, and quietness. And you can see some examples of where it comes in. You know, this is just like, it's a good, quiet, secure, peaceful day. And here's some examples of where this comes in: peace and security. Again, complacency. Now, the Proverbs don't always say complacency is a good thing. And here's the passage we are looking at today, Proverbs 17:1. So if you were to ask the question of most people, and you're like, so which one is better? To be quiet, peaceful, secure, content, or to be actively sacrificing? I think a lot of Christians would say, well, let's do this second one, because of course God likes sacrifices. And let's just not talk about food here. Moving beyond to like a whole lifestyle is like, can you be content? Can you be satisfied with peace instead of constant, here's our alternative, striving? So let's go back and look at that word for strife, because this also means something quite particular. So back to this interlinear sacrifices with strife. Let's see what this has to say. Because again, strife has kind of a particular meaning. And if we're trying to understand an analogy or a proverb, which is a lesson, we have to be clear about these two separate parts so that we can understand the relationship between them and how the writer is trying to teach us here. So strife can be a cause, strife, a controversy, contention, or something else. And so this looks to be like it's either a personal or a socially significant dispute. This is reminding me of that verse in Timothy, which talks about fleeing youthful lusts, and then goes on to describe it. Basically, that means to not get involved in these kinds of controversies and strife. So quarreling, people are fighting about who owns what land. Quarreling of the people, this is when they were complaining to God. Interesting. Bear witness in a lawsuit. So this word has legal connotations. So we have religious connotations in the word sacrifice. We have legal connotations. There is a dispute, and they come to the court. All right, so I think we kind of understand a little bit of what this word means. I'm going to scroll back down to 17 because this is going to show up. Look at this. Now we see that chapter 17 includes the word strife a couple times. Strife and quarreling. So we're going to have a choice here. This is the writer of Proverbs saying, if you have to choose between these two, between a house or between just having a dry morsel, which you're probably not going to have a lot of people come over to your house for leftovers. They most likely come over for feasting and sacrifices. But are you going to have quietness, content, and prosperity? Or if you have this. And now notice again, we're not just contrasting these two things. There's conditions. Now, if you had a dry morsel with strife, that would be the worst of all. And it is most likely possible to have a house full of feasting with quiet. But the point that the author is trying to make here then is that this first part doesn't matter quite so much. Because you can experience having nothing with quietness, with contentment, with wealth and prosperity, which is an experience of something, which is, it's not just a matter of what you have. It's saying, let's go beyond appearances and look at what our experience is of it. So either we're experiencing this quietness and prosperity, or we're experiencing strife. And if you have to choose, get rid of the sacrifices, get rid of the feasting, and settle for this, because quietness is so much more valuable than being involved with this. So I hope that's clear, that the author is putting these two things together in order to say, this piece is so much more important than sacrifices and feasting. There's going to be a lot of contrast like this throughout the Bible. And I'm reminded right now just of how wild it is. I'm an entrepreneur, and so I get a lot of advertisements from these super smart computer advertising agencies that tell me about kingdom business and all of these people who are pursuing the kingdom of God through wealth. And it reminds me so much, having been there myself, of seeking to make all of this sacrifice and create stuff for the kingdom of God, and striving, not necessarily like just quarreling and arguing with other people, but this has to do with having a cause, with seeking something. I have to do this for God. I have to build something. I have to create something with my life. That is the word strife. You're striving with life itself. And I've been recently learning the value of quietness. What can I offer to God? Who am I? What do I have to give besides simply being in his presence and experiencing the prosperity of that, the fullness of that, in contrast with sometimes what feels like the neediness of strife. And so my goal isn't to have huge sacrifices to bring to God. And it's fascinating. Like, I'm thinking now about First Samuel and how he's talking to the king, and he says to obey is better than to make sacrifices. So I think so often we get caught up in this material idea. Let me just switch out the video here. There we go. So that, I feel like so often we get caught up in this materialism where we measure the value of what we do on the basis of what we have, what it produces. We're not looking at the spirit of prosperity versus strife. This is an experience. This is an emotional experience. And I think I agree with the writer of Proverbs here that quietness, peace, prosperity is so much better than striving. Now, there's a part of me that is not totally comfortable with that because I come from a business background and we're like, let's go for it, let's get it done. And I sometimes wonder if part of the spiritual journey is learning that our biggest challenge as human beings is to be able to let go and to trust God and to make that journey together without having our sight set on something in this world, but having our sight set on something out of this world. For example, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, quietness. Could be added to that list. It fits in there, where striving is always listed in the along with these other things that are not part of the kingdom of God. So it seems like if there is a choice The writer of Proverbs is encouraging us to look at which one is it that is going to lead us to peace. Not necessarily which one is going to produce the most wealth and allow us to offer the biggest sacrifices to God and invite all of our friends over for feasting. So if you find yourself in this contrast, take some encouragement. Come back, take a look at the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 1. And thanks for joining me on this quick Proverbs exploration today. See you soon.